A blizzard slammed into New York the night Arianna Russo was left to freeze in an abandoned Brooklyn industrial yard, betrayed and beaten by the senator's son who thought she'd never dare speak out. She should have died there. But a homeless woman named Emily Carter crossed her path, giving up the only coat she owned to keep Arianna alive. That single act of compassion would ignite a storm in the criminal underworld and awaken the wrath of Dominic Russo, the most feared man in the city. The snowstorm had already swallowed most of Brooklyn by the time Tyler Gallagher shoved Arianna Russo out of his car and into the frozen gravel of the abandoned industrial yard. Wind howled through the rusted skeletons of old warehouses, sharp enough to sting the skin like blades. Arianna struggled to push herself up, her breath shaking as the cold bit into every exposed inch of her body. But Tyler only watched her with that drunken mix of wounded pride and entitlement that had been building in him all night. He stepped closer, his expensive shoes crunching through the ice. His lips curled in a cruel smirk that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with humiliation. He couldn't stand the idea that someone like her, a Mafia princess, adored and feared in equal measure, had dared to embarrass him in front of their wealthy friends at the party in Midtown. She told him no, that was all it took to break him. Arianna tasted blood at the corner of her lip as she wiped her mouth with the back of her glove. "Tyler, stop, please. This is insane," she whispered, but her voice came out thin, nearly lost to the roar of the wind. Her dress, torn at the sleeve from when she fought him off in the parking garage earlier, did nothing to protect her from the brutal cold. Tyler leaned down, grabbing her chin so tightly she winced, his whiskey-soaked breath forming thick clouds between them. "You should have thought about that before you humiliated me," he spat. "You think people listen to you because you re special. Because of your father. Tonight I make you realize you read just like everyone else." His bitterness radiated through the air thicker than the snow, and for the first time that night, Arianna felt a flicker of real fear that he wasn't just lashing out. He wanted to make her suffer. Tyler released her face and shoved her back again. She slipped on the ice and fell hard, cold shooting through her bones like electricity. He didn't help her. He didn't even look at her with an ounce of regret. He walked back to his sleek black Mercedes, pulled open the door, and hovered there for a moment as if savoring his victory. Arianna crawled toward him, her palms scraping against ice and gravel. "Don't leave me here," she begged, her voice cracking. "I don't have my phone. I don't have anything." He glanced back over his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment she thought she saw a trace of hesitation, but then it disappeared beneath his bruised ego. "Good luck getting home, princess," he sneered before slamming the door. The engine roared, headlights cutting through the snowfall in a blinding flash, and then the car sped away, throwing slush into the air and leaving Arianna in a storm that didn't care if she lived or died. She pushed herself upright, hugging her arms around her torso, but the cold was relentless. It crawled through her torn clothing, sank into her skin, and made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. She forced herself to stand, legs trembling. She had no sense of direction, no idea how far she was from civilization, and no strength to walk miles through a blizzard in heels. Her mind raced. Should she try to find shelter? Should she scream? Would anyone even hear her? Snowflakes spattered her face, and she could hardly keep her eyes open. Minutes felt like hours as she stumbled through the yard, disoriented and weakening. Her breath came in ragged bursts, growing shorter and more painful. Every step became harder, her fingers growing stiff, her vision blurring at the edges. She collapsed beside an old shipping container, unable to keep her balance. Her body curled into itself, trembling violently. She tried to force herself to stay awake, but exhaustion crept in like a predator. Somewhere in the distance, metal creaked under the wind, a reminder that she was utterly alone. Arianna's thoughts drifted to her father, Dominic Russo, a man known throughout New York as someone you never crossed. A man who had erased enemies from the city like they were dust. A man who would burn the world down if he knew what had happened to her. She wanted to see him. She wanted to hear him tell her everything would be okay. But her eyelids grew too heavy to fight. She lowered her head into the crook of her arm, praying anyone would find her before the cold claimed her completely. Her prayers were answered, though not in a way she ever could be predicted. A thin silhouette emerged through the curtain of snowfall, frail, trembling, and dressed in a coat far too worn to withstand the freezing night. Emily Carter didn't know the curled in the snow or the city dynasty she belonged to. She didn't know that approaching her would change every road her life had taken so far. All she saw was a young woman dying in front of her. Emily rushed forward, falling to her knees beside Arianna. Hey, look at me," she whispered urgently, brushing snow away from the girl's face. Arianna stirred weakly, her lips blue, her skin pale as marble. Emily didn't think twice. She unbuttoned her coat, a thin, faded thing patched at the elbows, and wrapped it around Arianna's shivering frame. The moment the coat left Emily's body, the cold punched into her like a fist. Her sweater was soaked within seconds. She felt her breath hitch, her fingers numb almost instantly. But she forced herself to pull Arianna upright, ignoring the burning pain in her feet as she stood. "You can't stay here," Emily murmured, lifting the girl's arm around her shoulder. "Come on, you have to move." Arianna groaned softly, unable to understand what was happening, but Emily held her tighter, guiding her slowly across the icy ground. Each step was agony. Emily had always survived by doing the impossible. Tonight was no different. She knew she couldn't carry Arianna miles through the storm, but maybe, just maybe, she could drag her toward the main road. Toward light. Toward help. The wind lashed at them, merciless, and Emily's bare feet screamed with every step, but she kept her grip firm. Arianna's weight sagged heavier with each passing second until her legs finally buckled. Emily caught her, lowering her gently into the snow, her own breath coming out in harsh, shuddering gasps. The world around them blurred under the white fury of the storm. Emily pressed the coat tighter around Arianna, hoping the leftover warmth in the fabric would sustain her. She'd given everything. She had her coat, her warmth, her safety, and she didn't regret it. She looked at Arianna one last time, whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep, and forced herself to walk into the storm again to search for help. That night would mark the beginning of a chain reaction across New York, one that would shake the criminal underworld, expose hidden loyalties, and turn a homeless woman into the unexpected center of a war she never asked to be part of. Emily Carter's body was already trembling from the cold by the time she managed to drag Arianna a few yards away from where she had collapsed. The storm had grown even more vicious, the wind clawing at her clothes as if determined to tear away what little protection she had left. Her toes had gone numb the moment her bare feet touched the frozen ground, but she pushed forward anyway, half carrying, half guiding the nearly unconscious girl beside her. Emily didn't know who she was saving. She didn't know that Arianna Russo belonged to one of the most feared families in New York, or that the wrong move could put her in the crosshairs of dangerous men. None of that mattered. What she saw was a young woman dying in front of her, and Emily had never been the kind of person to walk away from someone who needed help, no matter how much her own life was falling apart. Arianna's head dropped forward as if she no longer had the strength to hold it up. Emily tightened her grip around her waist, teeth chattering as she forced her voice to stay steady. "Stay with me, okay? You've gotta stay awake." She didn't expect an answer, and she didn't get one. Arianna's breath came out in short and even gasps, her lips tinted blue, her eyelashes frosted with ice. The girl's condition was worsening quickly and dangerously, and Emily knew that if she didn't find help soon, there was no coming back from this. The weight of Arianna's body pulled heavily against her side, draining what little energy Emily had left. She hadn't eaten since early that morning, just a granola bar she'd been saving, and her stomach twisted painfully with every step. Her fingers stiffened until she could barely feel Arianna's sleeve beneath them. The dull ache in her joints spread through her arms, her legs, her chest. Cold was no longer just around her. It was inside her, sinking deeper each minute, but she refused to stop. She'd survived worse nights than this. Nights when she wasn't sure she'd wake up. Nights sleeping under bridges, in subway tunnels, in the corner of an abandoned stairwell. Nights when hunger gnawed so violently she thought she might choke on it. Compared to those memories, this storm was just another enemy she needed to outlast. Emily attempted to move forward again, but Arianna's legs buckled, and the girl collapsed into the snow with a soft, broken sound that cut through Emily's heart. She knelt beside her, breath shaking. The blizzard swirled around them, reducing the world into a blur of white. "Come on," she whispered desperately, brushing the snow off Arianna's face. "Don't give up, not here, not like this." But Arianna's head lolled to the side as if she couldn't hear her, her consciousness slipping further away. Emily hugged herself for a moment, bracing against the brutal wind. The temperature felt like it had dropped even lower, stabbing at her through her wet sweater. She had to think. She had to make a plan. She scanned the area through the storm. The factories around them were empty, windows shattered, doors ripped off their hinges. Going inside any of them was dangerous, but staying out here was a guaranteed death sentence. She weighed her options, biting down on her lip until she tasted blood. She couldn't leave Arianna alone, not even for a minute. Yet she needed to find something, anything, to shield them from the worst of the storm. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Far in the distance, near the street they had stumbled from, headlights flashed faintly behind a curtain of snow. Emily's pulse kicked up. If she could just reach the road, maybe she could flag someone down. Maybe someone out there would slow down long enough to notice two girls freezing to death. But the vehicle disappeared a second later, swallowed by the storm again. She cursed under her breath and turned back to Arianna, her heart sinking. They didn't have time, not enough time to wait for someone to magically appear. Not enough time to drag Arianna all the way to the street. Not enough time for anything except acting now. Emily crouched behind Arianna, looping one arm under the girl's shoulders and the other under her knees, attempting to lift her. Her muscles screamed in protest, her breath coming out ragged, but she gritted her teeth and forced herself upward. Arianna was taller than she'd realized, heavier too, but adrenaline surged through Emily with a power born of desperation. She staggered forward, every step a battle, her bare feet tearing open on the ice. She could feel warm blood seeping through the cracks in her skin, mixing with snow, but she didn't stop. She didn't look down. Pain was distant now, something she could acknowledge later if she survived this night. Minutes stretched endlessly. Emily's vision blurred with each step, and the darkness at the edges of her sight grew thicker. She blinked rapidly, trying to clear her head, but exhaustion seeped into her like poison. Arianna slipped slightly in her grip and Emily gasped, tightening her hold. "Don't do this to me," she whispered softly. "I'm trying. I'm really trying. Don't make me lose you." She didn't know why it felt so personal, why saving a stranger meant so much. Maybe because she knew what it felt like to need help and have no one. Maybe because she'd begged for mercy before and had been met with cruelty. Maybe because deep inside, Emily refused to let the world harden her the way life had tried to. She couldn't carry Arianna anymore. Her body gave out all at once, knees buckling, shoulders shaking uncontrollably. She sank into the snow, Arianna half cradled in her arms. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, but breathing felt like inhaling broken glass. The snow piled around them instantly, clinging to her hair, her eyelashes, her trembling lips. She pulled Arianna closer, pressing the girl's frozen cheek against her shoulder in an attempt to share whatever warmth remained. Arianna stirred weakly, a small, cracked voice slipped out. Cold, she whispered, barely audible. Emily swallowed hard. "I know," she murmured, brushing strands of frozen hair from Arianna's face. "I know, I'm sorry, I'm doing everything I can." She had no idea how long they sat huddled together in the snow, seconds, minutes. The storm distorted time, turning everything into a nightmare loop of freezing wind and quiet gasps for breath. Emily's thoughts drifted to her younger sister, Grace, her only family left in the world. She imagined Grace's sweet smile, her brave attempts to hide the pain of her heart condition, her hope that things would someday get better. Emily had always promised she would come home to her, no matter what. She couldn't break that promise tonight. Somewhere in the haze of cold and exhaustion, she heard a distant rumble, a car engine. Emily forced her head up, blinking through the storm. The faint glow of headlights was cutting through the snowfall again, this time closer, moving slowly along the road that bordered the industrial yard. Her heart kicked into gear. She shifted Arianna slightly, whispering a hoarse apology, and forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled violently, threatening to collapse, but she didn't have another choice. She stumbled forward, dragging Arianna with her, her bare feet skidding across the ice. The headlights grew brighter, closer. Emily pulled herself upright one last time and waved frantically, screaming for help. The wind swallowed her voice, but the desperate motion of her arms caught the driver's attention. The vehicle slowed. Emily felt hope surge so intensely it almost hurt. Her body finally gave out, and she collapsed into the snow beside Arianna. The last thing she saw before her vision dimmed completely was the car door opening and a shadowed figure sprinting toward them. And then everything faded into white. When the call came in, Dominic Russo was sitting at the head of a polished mahogany conference table on the top floor of the Russo Tower, surrounded by the most powerful men in Manhattan's underworld. He wasn't the type to speak unless necessary. His presence alone commanded obedience. Dressed in a charcoal three-piece suit, sleeves crisp, gold signet ring catching the low light, he exuded the kind of authority that made grown men reconsider every word before they dared to utter it. The room was filled with leaders of allied factions discussing territory lines, business expansions, and settlement clauses. Yet Dominic remained focused and detached, the expression on his face calm and unreadable. He preferred observation. Words were tools, timing was everything. But the moment his phone vibrated against the surface of the table, something in the air shifted. Everyone noticed. Marco DeLuca, Dominic's right hand for nearly 2 decades, never contacted him during meetings unless the matter was severe enough to derail business. Dominic reached for the phone, glanced at the caller ID, and answered without stepping out, simply lifting the device to his ear in a low, controlled motion. He didn't greet Marco. He didn't need to. Marco's voice carried urgency, strained in a way Dominic rarely heard. Arianna Hospital. 2 words, nothing more. That was all it took for Dominic's world to narrow to a pinpoint. His jaw clenched once, so subtly only those who knew him well caught it. The other men in the room fell quiet, watching him with underlying dread. Even the temperature seemed to drop. Dominic stood slowly, placing the phone down with measured precision. No abrupt movements, nothing impulsive. He straightened his suit jacket, adjusted his cuff links, and nodded once. "We're done here. No explanation, no dismissal ritual, no threats." Yet none of the men dared to question him. They parted like water around a blade as Dominic walked to the private elevator reserved only for him and his most trusted guards. Once the doors closed, the Fiade cracked just slightly, a tightening of his grip, a deep inhale he forced steady. His daughter was the one soft place in his brutal world, the one person who reminded him he was still capable of something human. Anyone who harmed her had signed their own death certificate before even realizing it. The elevator dropped 30 floors in less than half a minute. Dominic stepped into the underground garage where his black Maybach already waited, engine running, driver alert. 3 bodyguards fell in behind him, but Dominic lifted a hand. "Only Marco," he ordered. The others didn't argue. Dominic climbed into the back seat, and before the door even shut, he called Marco again. "What happened?" he demanded, voice low and controlled though fire pulsed beneath it. Marco responded immediately. "She was found in the old Brooklyn industrial yard. Hypothermia, severe. She was brought into emergency care 10 minutes ago. They're restabilizing her now. No other details yet." Dominic's eyes darkened, emotions tightening in his chest like a vise, but he maintained his outward calm. "Find out everything. Who touched her? Who left her there? I want names before I arrive." Marco's tone shifted, harder, colder, already in motion. The car surged forward, cutting through Manhattan traffic with a precision that belonged to men who'd driven Dominic through far worse situations. Snow blanketed the streets, turning the city into a blur of white and muted colors, but Dominic barely registered it. His mind was already building scenarios, calculating motives, considering which enemies had grown bold enough to try something this reckless. Yet a small dread tugged at him. Arianna was 17, smart, stubborn, trusting in ways that made Dominic feel like he was constantly one step behind the world's dangers. She had slipped out for a friend's party earlier that evening, assuring him she would be fine. He let her go because he couldn't cage her forever, but now guilt sank like a stone in his gut. By the time they reached Brooklyn, the Maybach skidded slightly on icy pavement as it pulled up to the emergency entrance of Brooklyn Memorial Hospital. Dominic exited the car before the driver could open his door. Inside the lobby, Marco waited with a grim expression. Snow clung to his shoulders, his hair still damp from being outside. "3rd floor, room 308. Drister Morales is with her," Marco reported. Dominic didn't break stride. He moved like a force of nature through the hallway, people stepping aside instinctively even if they didn't know who he was. His presence demanded it. When he reached the door, his hand hesitated only a fraction of a second before pushing it open. Arianna lay on a hospital bed, lines running into her arm, warm blankets piled over her small frame. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, cheeks flushed with the burn of extreme cold. Her long dark hair stuck to her forehead, damp from the heating pads and warm of fluids. But her eyes, those bright, fierce eyes, fluttered open the moment she sensed him. Her voice cracked, weak and raspy. Dominic crossed the room in seconds, lowering himself beside her bed. He brushed a hand lightly over her forehead, an action so gentle it contradicted every story ever told about him. "What happened?" he asked, though the question was directed more at her expression than her words. Arianna swallowed, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "I tried to leave the party. Tyler, he grabbed me, he was angry. He drove me somewhere, I tried to run, he hit me. He said I embarrassed him, he left me there." Dominic didn't breathe for several seconds. His daughter's voice trembled as she continued. "I thought I was going to die, then someone found me. A woman, she gave me her coat, she saved me." Dominic turned to see the thin, tattered navy coat folded neatly on the nearby chair. He picked it up, feeling its weight or lack of it. Worn fabric, mismatched buttons, hand-stitched patches. It was more survival than clothing. Someone had sacrificed the one thing keeping them alive. For his daughter. He tightened his hold on the coat. "Marco," he said without looking back, voice like carved steel, "find the woman. Find her and bring her to me, and find Tyler Gallagher." He paused, jaw clenching, alive for now. In that moment, everyone in the room understood something with absolute clarity. Whoever had harmed Arianna Russo would face consequences beyond imagination. And whoever had saved her had unknowingly changed the destiny of 2 families and ignited the beginning of a storm that would sweep across New York. Finding Tyler Gallagher wasn't difficult. People like him, the pampered sons of powerful men, moved through New York with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. leaving behind a trail of expensive liquor, carelessly thrown insults, and friends too intoxicated by his surname to question his behavior. Dominic Russo's men tracked him in less than an hour. Tyler was drinking again, surrounded by wealthy college boys and fun girls in a penthouse lounge overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline. Music pulsed through the space, lights flickered like neon ghosts against the glass walls, and Tyler laughed louder than anyone else in the room, retelling a twisted version of his adventure with Arianna, as if leaving a girl to freeze in Brooklyn were nothing more than a drunken misstep. His friends didn't push back. They giggled, clapped him on the shoulder, and reached for more champagne. None of them realized the danger that was approaching them like an oncoming storm. The penthouse lights suddenly flickered. Once, twice, then everything went black. A few people screamed. Someone dropped a glass, the sound sharp against the floor. Before panic had time to spread, emergency backup lighting clicked on, casting the room in a harsh red glow. 10 men in dark tactical clothing stood scattered throughout the spacemen who had moved in without a sound, each holding a weapon with a relaxed precision that left no room for negotiation. The partygoers froze, their panic thickening the air. One girl began to sob. Someone tried to pull out his phone, but a guard was already beside him, knocking it from his hand with cold efficiency. Tyler stumbled backward, alcohol clouding his judgment. "What the hell is this? Do you know who I am?" he yelled, voice cracking. One of the men stepped forward. "Tyler Gallagher," he said evenly. "You're coming with us." Tyler's bravado wavered. He glanced around wildly as if expecting bodyguards or police to materialize out of thin air. "My father's a senator," he snapped. "You can't just..." The man didn't let him finish. "Your father can't help you tonight." With that, 2 guards grabbed Tyler, twisting his arms behind him with practiced ease. He struggled, cursing, kicking, desperate to cling to any sense of control, but compared to them, he was nothing more than a drunken, entitled boy. They dragged him into the elevator as his friends stared wide-eyed, too frightened to speak. The drive felt endless for Tyler. He squirmed in the back seat, blindfolded now, wrists bound, every bump in the road jarring him back into sobering fear. Gone was the party boy swagger, gone was the false confidence of someone who thought being a senator's son made him untouchable. All that remained was the growing panic curling in his stomach like a tightening rope. He tried to speak, to threaten, to plead, but the men ignored him. They didn't need to respond. Their orders had come directly from Dominic Russo, and no one disobeyed Dominic. The car eventually stopped. Tyler was hauled out, half stumbling as his legs shook beneath him. When the blindfold was removed, he blinked rapidly, trying to adjust his eyes to the dim warehouse lighting. A single overhead bulb cast a stark glow onto the concrete floor beneath him. The room was vast, mostly empty except for the metal chair he was forced into, wrists tied tightly to its arms. He tugged against the restraints, but they didn't budge. Breath quickening, chest rising and falling in frantic jerks, Tyler scanned the darkness surrounding him. A shadow separated itself from the far end of the warehouse, stepping into the light with slow, controlled movements that radiated authority. Dominic Russo didn't need to shout. He didn't need weapons or theatrics. The weight of his reputation did most of the work. Tyler had seen images of him before, rumors in tabloids, blurry paparazzi snapshots capturing a man with both elegance and danger carved into his posture. But seeing Dominic in person was different, much worse. The man looked carved from stone, his black coat falling elegantly at his sides. His dark eyes fixated on Tyler with a depth that made the boy's breath catch in his throat. Dominic stopped in front of him, hands clasped behind his back. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, precise, each word cutting through the air like a knife. "You knew who my daughter was before you approached her." Tyler swallowed hard, throat bobbing nervously. "I didn't know she was yours," he lied. Dominic tilted his head slightly, studying him the way a surgeon studies an incision point. "You researched her. You knew her friends, her routine, her name. You knew exactly who she was." Tyler had no answer. Dominic continued, voice cooling further. "You believed associating with her would elevate your status. Until she rejected you." Tyler trembled now, his fear overtaking whatever alcohol lingered in his bloodstream. She embarrassed me," he stammered. "She made me look weak in front of everyone. I just wanted to..." Dominic cut him off with a step forward. "You left my daughter in a Brooklyn industrial yard during a blizzard. You struck her. You abandoned her." Each accusation resonated as Dominic's control tightened. "A teenage girl, my teenage girl." Tyler burst into tears, panic overwhelming him. "Please," he begged, "I'm sorry, I didn't think." Dominic raised a hand. "That is your problem, Tyler, you didn't think." He glanced toward one of his men who stepped forward carrying a small metal toolbox. Tyler's face drained of color. Dominic didn't touch the tools, he didn't need to. His men moved with silent coordination, running electric clippers across Tyler's scalp and shaving off his golden hair, the strands falling in clumps across his chest. Tyler cried harder, humiliation and fear merging into raw terror. Next came the knife. Not deep enough to kill. Not deep enough to maim, just enough to carve a message that Tyler would carry for the rest of his life. The blade bit into his skin in careful strokes as Tyler screamed, echoing off the warehouse walls. When Dominic's men stepped back, the word carved across his chest was unmistakable: coward. Dominic pulled out his phone, snapped a picture, and sent it directly to Senator Gallagher with a short message: "Your son lives because of your position. If he ever approaches my daughter again, he won't." With a nod, Dominic's men untied Tyler and dragged him out of the warehouse, dumping him near his family estate in the freezing night. He was shaking, shirtless, bleeding, and barely conscious. It was the same way he had left Arianna, only now he understood what it meant to be powerless. Dominic watched them leave, his expression unreadable. He showed no satisfaction, no remorse, no emotional reaction at all. He simply adjusted his coat, turning toward the exit with measured steps. He wasn't done. There was still a woman out there, a stranger who had saved his daughter at the cost of her own life. Whoever she was, she had just become the most important unknown in Dominic Russo's world. Marco DeLuca and the team of search operatives hit the streets of Brooklyn before Dominic had even left the warehouse where Tyler Gallagher had been dealt with. The snowstorm had grown even more brutal. Gusts of icy wind whipping past abandoned buildings and rattling rusted metal fencing as if the entire borough were groaning under the weight of winter's wrath. Marco wasn't a man easily shaken. He'd lived through more bloodshed and betrayal than most, but the urgency of Dominic's order pressed heavy on his shoulders. He wasn't searching for an enemy or a threat this time. He was searching for a woman who had risked her life to save the daughter of the most dangerous man in New York. And every minute that passed without finding her decreased her chance of surviving the cold. The SUVs rolled through the industrial district, headlights cutting through whiteout conditions as the operatives fanned out in strategic formation. Marco stepped out into the bitter air, pulling his coat tighter around him. The wind sliced at his face, yet all he could think about was the coat Arianna described: thin, patched, nearly falling apart. A coat like that wouldn't protect anyone in a storm like this. And if the woman had given it up, she might already be dying. "Spread out," Marco ordered. "Flashlights. Look for footprints, scraps of clothing, anything." His breath crystallized instantly as he spoke. Two operatives moved toward the old factory lots while another swept the alleyways between the abandoned warehouses. Marco went straight to the place where Arianna had been found. The snow had piled up quickly, but faint impressions remained: shallow dips where someone had fallen, irregular patterns suggesting a struggle. Marco crouched and brushed aside fresh layers of snow until something caught his eye: the prints of two sets of feet. One set was from Arianna's boots, the other Marco felt his chest tighten. Bare footprints, small, narrow, pressed deeply into the ice. "Jesus," he muttered under his breath. Walking barefoot in this weather was a death sentence, yet she had done it anyway just to get Arianna help.
He raised voice, "This way!"
The team converged on the trail as Marco followed the footprints carefully. The path wove through the lot, across a field of debris, and toward an alley behind a row of shuttered factories. The prints grew more chaotic the farther they went. At first they were steady, purposeful, but soon they became uneven, dragging at odd angles as if Emily had started losing balance. A few feet ahead, Marco found the first place she had fallen. The snow packed down with the shape of knees and palms where she had struggled to stand again. Nearby, a small patch of red stained the snow. "She's hurt," one of the operatives said quietly. Marco nodded grimly. And she kept going. The trail continued past a chain link fence, bent outward from years of neglect. Beyond it, the alley opened into a stretch of dead factories, their windows boarded, their brick facades cracked and weathered from decades of decay. The wind whistled down the narrow corridor, carrying the sharp scent of rust and snow. Marco's flashlight beam illuminated more bare footprints leading toward the back of a particularly decrepit building with a partially collapsed roof. As they approached, the footsteps grew more erratic, the spacing shorter, the shape smeared as if her legs had given out repeatedly. Finally, Marco spotted a heavy iron door set beneath a crumbling concrete staircase. The footprints ended there. He rested a hand against the cold metal. "She's inside," he said, without waiting for backup. He pulled the door open. Hinges screeched in protest as the smell of dampness, dust, and mildew poured into the open air. "Lights," he ordered. Flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a basement that was less a living space and more a last resort for someone with nowhere else to go. The basement was small and miserable, maybe 20 square meters, ceiling low, walls stained with mold. A torn sleeping bag lay atop a flattened pile of cardboard. A few canned goods were lined neatly beside a frayed backpack. A plastic water bottle, half frozen, sat on the floor. Someone had tried to create order in a place meant for abandonment. Someone had fought to survive here. Marco's flashlight swept toward the farthest corner of the basement, and there she was. Emily Carter lay curled on a thin mattress, her body trembling faintly but growing still between each shudder. She was soaked, her thin sweater clinging to her like a frozen second skin. Her jeans were stiff with frost. Her bare feet were the worst, darkened to a blackish purple, cracked, bleeding, the cold carving its own brutal map across her skin. Marco crossed the room in seconds, dropping to his knees beside her. "Ma'am," he said sharply, leaning close. Her eyelids didn't open. Her breath was faint, barely visible even in the freezing air. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. For a moment he felt nothing. Then weak, slow, "Fragile but alive, we need to move, now." He pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around her, tucking it under her arms as if trying to seal in whatever warmth he could. Carefully, he slid one arm beneath her back and the other beneath her legs. She was frighteningly light, her weight nothing but bones wrapped in frozen fabric. As he lifted her, her head sagged against his chest, and a faint sound escaped her lips, a small, broken whisper. "Grace." Marco frowned. "Who's Grace?" But the woman didn't respond. Her hand twitched weakly against his coat, fingers cracked and stiff. His men cleared the path as Marco carried her up the stairs and out into the storm. Snow swirled fiercely, stinging his face, but he shielded her as best he could, rushing toward the SUV parked at the curb. The heater was already blasting inside, fogging the windows. As soon as he climbed in, one operative shut the door behind him. "Drive," Marco barked. The SUV tore through the snow-covered street, speeding toward the Russo estate, where a fully equipped medical wing and Dominic's personal physician waited. Emily's breathing grew more uneven with every passing minute. Marco held her tighter, trying to keep her warm, listening to the fragile rhythm of her lungs. She had saved Arianna by nearly giving her own life. No one with this kind of courage deserved to die on a basement floor in the dark. Dominic would never allow that. As the SUV pulled onto the private road leading to the estate, Marco looked down at her again. "Hold on," he murmured, voice low, steady, carrying the weight of a promise. "Your fight's done. We've got you now." And somewhere far from consciousness, Emily's body leaned instinctively into warmth for the first time in months. Unaware that she had just entered the home and the world of the most powerful man in New York, Emily Carter didn't wake up for nearly 2 days. In that time, Dominic Russo learned more about her life than she had probably ever told another human being. He had her transferred to his private medical wing, a fully equipped suite within the Russo estate where world-class physicians and nurses operated under strict confidentiality. Helena Morales, Dominic's personal physician, was the one to stabilize Emily's body temperature, treat the frostbite on her feet, and manage the fluids that kept her alive. Dominic visited the medical wing 3 times that first night, though none of the staff dared to comment. He stood near the glass window, arms crossed, expression carved into something both focused and intense. Emily looked impossibly fragile lying beneath warm blankets, her breathing shallow, her face gaunt, her skin marked with exhaustion. Dominic was not a man who was easily disturbed, but something about this woman unsettled him, something about her willingness to sacrifice everything for a girl she didn't know. By morning, Dominic had ordered a full background check, not the kind a private investigator would run, but the kind that only someone with his reach could obtain. No tale was too small, no file too hidden, no database too secure. Marco arrived in Dominic's study with a thick folder, dropping it gently onto the solid oak desk. Dominic opened it without hesitation. The first page alone made the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Emily Carter," he read aloud, age 27, born in Queens. Her mother, Sarah Carter, had died of cancer 13 years earlier. Dominic paused at the faded photo clipped to the medical report. Sarah, thin but smiling, holding a young Emily with bright eyes and tangled hair. The next pages detailed the mother's rapid decline, the financial ruin of hospital debts, and the custody transfer of Emily to Sarah's new husband, Mark Carter. Dominic turned the page again and his eyes hardened. School reports, attendance logs. A note from a middle school counselor reporting unexplained bruises on Emily's arms. Another report marking an incident where she arrived with a split lip and claimed she had fallen down the stairs. Dominic didn't need anyone to explain. He'd seen this pattern before, too many times. He flipped to hospital records: sprained wrist, broken rib, deep laceration near the shoulder requiring 8 stitches. Each injury occurred while Emily lived under Mark Carter's roof. Each injury marked as accident. Dominic's gaze sharpened, the tension in his shoulders rising like a coiled wire. He turned to Marco. "This man did all this." Marco nodded grimly. Neighbors reported yelling, loud crashes, screaming. Police were called twice but didn't follow through. Dominic's fingers pressed into the file, knuckles whitening. He beat her for 4 years, from age 14 to 18, Marco said. Every document lines up. Dominic exhaled slowly, his composure thinning but not breaking. Then came the page that truly made him go still. A report from the NIP Human Trafficking Task Force, a raid, a shipping container. 12 girls found inside. One escaped before the raid occurred, breaking a lock with a sharp metal fragment. Her name Emily Carter. Dominic scanned the lines again, each detail striking him with increasing weight. 18 years old. Sold to traffickers by her stepfather for $10,000. $10,000 for a human life. Dominic leaned back slightly, absorbing the meaning of it all. She had broken her own restraints. She had run barefoot through the night, bleeding, starving, terrified, but determined to survive, and no one had helped her. No one had protected her. She had carried those scars by herself for nearly a decade. Dominic's fist closed around the edge of the file, a low heat burning through his veins, the kind that sharpened rather than blinded. He kept reading. After escaping, Emily had lived in shelters, taken part-time work cleaning offices, washing dishes, bussing tables, anything that kept her alive. She eventually found her sister Grace in the foster system. A 12-year-old girl with a severe congenital heart condition requiring a surgery that cost more money than Emily could earn in a decade. Yet she still tried. She worked 3 jobs, slept little, ate less, and eventually ended up in the abandoned basement where Marco found her, trying to save enough to bring Grace home. Dominic closed the file slowly. He wasn't a man prone to emotional response, but respect, deep, unyielding respect, settled in him like a weight. Emily had endured hardships that would have broken most people. And still she had risked her remaining strength to save his daughter. She didn't know who Arianna was. She didn't care. She simply saw a girl dying in the snow and acted. Later that afternoon, Dominic returned to the medical wing. Emily was still unconscious, her breath stronger now, but her body clearly exhausted. He stepped beside her bed and studied her features, the delicate curve of her jaw, the faint freckles across her cheeks, the dark circles under her eyes that hinted at years of sleepless nights. Her hands were bandaged, small and cracked, but steady. Her feet were wrapped carefully to prevent further damage. She looked like someone who had fought every day of her life and expected nothing in return. Dominic wondered how long she had been walking through this city unseen, ignored by the world he controlled. Druta Morales approached him, adjusting her glasses. Her condition is stable, she said. She's dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from severe exhaustion, but she's strong. Most people wouldn't have survived that cold. Dominic nodded once. How long until she wakes? Hard to say, Morales answered. Her body is recovering from more than hypothermia. Trauma leaves its own exhaustion. Dominic understood more than he let on. He turned toward the window. Snow still fell outside, blanketing the grounds of the estate in white. Somewhere out there, Grace Carter was likely waiting for her sister to visit again, unaware that Emily was fighting for her life. Dominic stayed longer than he intended, his usually restless temperament settling into something strangely patient. He watched the soft rise and fall of her chest, the slight flutter of her eyelids as her body drifted through fragile sleep cycles. He wasn't sure what compelled him to stay, maybe gratitude, maybe responsibility, maybe something he didn't want to name. Marco eventually knocked on the doorframe softly. Boss, he said, what do you want to do next? Dominic didn't look away from Emily. We protect her, he said simply, from everything she's ever had to face. Marco nodded, understanding the weight of that vow. Dominic was a man of brutal action, decisive force, and unbreakable loyalty. Once he chose to protect someone, the entire city would bend around that choice. And Emily Carter had unknowingly stepped into the protection of a man who would move heaven and earth for anyone who saved his daughter. For the first time in years, Dominic felt something shift in him, something reminiscent of the man he had been before power hardened him. Emily Carter had survived the world alone. She wouldn't have to anymore. Emily Carter woke to the soft hum of machines and the faint warmth of a heated blanket pressed gently over her body. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Her mind struggled through layers of fog, confusion, and exhaustion, trying to separate dream from reality. Last she remembered, she was stumbling through a blizzard with Arianna collapsing at her side. Her body had been numb, her vision fading, her thoughts drifting toward Grace, her little sister, her only family whose face kept appearing in the darkness. Emily blinked slowly. The ceiling above her wasn't the cracked concrete she was familiar with. It was high, white, elegant, and framed with soft lighting designed to soothe patients. She turned her head slightly and saw medical monitors, fresh flowers, a glass of water on a wooden nightstand, and an armchair that looked far too expensive to belong in a public hospital. Her heartbeat picked up, confusion blooming deeper. Where am I? She whispered, though her voice cracked from dehydration. Dr. Morales entered the room at that moment, flipping through Emily's chart before offering a reassuring smile. "You're safe," she said. "You're in a private medical wing in Manhattan. You've been sleeping for nearly 2 days." Emily's eyes widened. She tried to sit up instinctively, but the pain in her feet shot up her legs like electricity, forcing her back down with a gasp. "Easy," Morales said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your body is still recovering. Severe hypothermia, frostbite, dehydration, malnutrition. You've been through more than most people experience in a lifetime." Emily swallowed hard. "Arianna," she managed, "is the girl okay?" A hint of a smile touched the doctor's face. "She's perfectly fine. You saved her life." The relief that washed through Emily was short-lived because another question slammed into her mind. How had she gotten here? Before she could ask, the door opened and Arianna herself burst inside, her cheeks pink with emotion, her dark hair tied in a messy ponytail. She looked nothing like the frozen, fading girl Emily had found in the snow. She rushed to the bedside and wrapped her arms gently around Emily, careful not to hurt her. "Thank you," Arianna whispered, voice tight. "Thank you for not letting me die out there." Emily froze, unsure how to react. Compliments felt foreign, gratitude even more so. She lifted a trembling hand and awkwardly patted Arianna's back. "You're welcome," she murmured, her throat tightening. But then Arianna stepped aside and Emily saw him. Dominic Russo. Tall, controlled, dressed in a black suit that somehow conveyed both elegance and danger. His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She didn't know who he was, but every instinct in her body reacted as if she were standing in front of a storm she couldn't escape. Dominic moved closer, each step measured, each breath deliberate, carrying the kind of authority that came from power most people couldn't fathom. "Ms. Carter," he said, voice deep and smooth. "I've been waiting to speak with you." Emily shifted uncomfortably. She didn't understand why someone like him would care about someone like her. She pulled the blanket closer around herself, suddenly very aware of the bandages on her hands, the IV in her arm, the weakness in her limbs. "Why am I here?" she asked. I don't understand." Dominic didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the foot of her bed, his gaze steady, assessing her silently. "You saved my daughter's life," he said finally. "You gave up the only coat you owned. You walked barefoot through a blizzard. Without you, she would not be alive." Emily swallowed, throat tight. Anyone would have done the same. Dominic's brows lowered slightly. "No," he said firmly. "Most people wouldn't. You did." She didn't know what to say, so she looked down at her bandaged hands. When she looked up again, Dominic's expression had shifted, less analytical, more resolute. "I know everything about your situation," he said. "Your sister Grace, her condition, your jobs, your living arrangements, what you've endured." Emily stiffened. "You investigated me?" she asked, voice trembling with something between fear and anger. "Why would you?" "Because you became connected to my daughter," Dominic replied calmly. "I protect what is mine. That includes anyone who saves her." His words hit her with a weight she didn't expect. Protect. No one had ever used that word for her. Dominic took a slow breath, then delivered the proposal that would change her life. "I'm offering you a deal," he said. "I will pay for Grace's surgery in full. She will receive the best medical care in New York. I will give you a safe, furnished apartment, a real home, and stable work, legal work as my assistant, good salary, good hours, benefits. You will be able to take care of yourself and Grace without breaking your body to do it." Emily stared at him, stunned. For years she had scraped by on the brink of collapse, taking on every shift, sacrificing food to pay for medicine, sleeping in basements because the rent anywhere else was impossible. No one had ever offered her anything but pity or avoidance. But this man, this stranger, was offering her everything she'd dreamed of. Her breathing quickened. "What do you want in return?" she asked quietly, unable to hide the fear in her voice. Dominic held her gaze steadily. 2 years of your time," he said, "working for me, nothing outside the law, nothing dangerous, just office work, scheduling, organizing. Administrative tasks." Emily searched his face for deception, manipulation, hidden motives, but found none. Only a resolve she didn't understand. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help someone like me?" His expression softened just enough to reveal something underneath the armor he wore. "Because you gave everything you had to save someone you didn't know," Dominic said. "And because I once did the same. But no one came to save me." The room felt heavy with meaning she couldn't decipher. Emily's eyes burned with unexpected emotion. She looked away, tears gathering despite her attempts to blink them back. "I don't take charity," she whispered. "I can't." Dominic stepped closer, his voice gentler than before. "Then consider it a contract," he said. "Not charity, not debt, a partnership. You save her," he nodded toward Arianna, "and I save your sister." Arianna reached for Emily's hand, squeezing lightly. "Please say yes," she whispered. "I want you in my life." That more than anything broke what little resistance Emily had left. She closed her eyes, inhaling shakily. Grace needed this. She needed this. She couldn't keep running herself into the ground. She couldn't keep hoping the world would soften if she suffered long enough. When she opened her eyes again, she looked directly at Dominic. "All right," she said, voice hoarse but steady. "I accept your offer." Dominic inclined his head, not smiling but exuding a quiet sense of resolution, as if her answer completed a puzzle he'd already built in his mind. "Good," he said, "then your new life begins today." Emily didn't know it yet, but those words marked the end of everything she had been, and the beginning of everything she would become. Emily's recovery took another week, and during that time the Russo estate gradually transformed from an intimidating fortress into something she could navigate without flinching at every sound. The mansion was huge, far beyond anything she had ever imagined stepping inside. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, warm lighting, polished woodwork, and windows that looked out over acres of snow-covered land. Yet despite the grandeur, Emily found herself gravitating toward quieter corners, the conservatory with its soft green plants, the stone terrace where the winter wind hummed softly, the library lined with towering shelves of books she could never afford but loved to admire. Dominic had encouraged her to rest, and she did, though rest felt unfamiliar. Her life had never allowed it before. Arianna visited daily, bringing laughter and light into the medical wing. She told stories about school, her favorite bands, her dislike of certain tutors, and even her secret dream of becoming a photographer. Emily wasn't used to affection from strangers, but Arianna's warmth was impossible not to return. She reminded Emily of Grace, bright, hopeful, endlessly resilient. That small bond grew quickly into something sisterly, and Dominic noticed. His eyes softened whenever he passed by and saw Arianna perched on the edge of the bed, talking to Emily as if she'd known her for years. When the doctors finally cleared Emily to begin light responsibilities as Dominic's assistant, she wasn't sure what to expect. She had never worked in an office. Her entire adult life had been survival: dishwashing, cleaning, stocking shelves, taking whatever jobs kept her going. She feared she wouldn't be enough, that she'd fail him after everything he had offered her. But when she arrived in Dominic's private office on the top floor of the estate, she found him waiting with a level of patience she hadn't anticipated. He stood with his hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, a small stack of folders prepared on the desk. "You don't need to be nervous," he said, watching her closely. "The job is simple: organization, scheduling, prioritizing, communication. You will learn as you go. I don't expect perfection, only honesty and effort." It was the first time anyone had ever spoken to her with expectations that weren't rooted in exploitation or disdain. Emily nodded, her hands folding together to keep them from shaking. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, then handed her the first folder. "I know you will." Their workdays began slowly. Emily learned how to sort through Dominic's meetings, filter messages, update schedules, coordinate logistics, and prepare brief summaries for his nightly reviews. She was shocked to discover that despite his intimidating presence and reputation, Dominic's organization system was a mess: documents stacked out of order, deadlines scribbled on scraps of paper, messages flagged but not categorized. He handled global negotiations and dangerous alliances with ease, but apparently couldn't find a color-coded binder if it was 3 inches from his hand. Emily hesitated the first time she reorganized his files. She spent the entire evening worrying she had overstepped. But the next morning, Dominic walked into the office, scanned the neatly arranged documents, and raised an eyebrow. "You did this?" She swallowed. "Yes, I thought it might help." He lifted one folder, flipped through it, and exhaled softly. "It does." His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface. "Good work, Emily." As days turned to weeks, they fell into an unexpected rhythm. Dominic, who rarely allowed anyone near his personal space, gradually opened the door for Emily to step into roles previously exclusive to Marco. She helped prepare reports for meetings, greeted high-profile associates who entered the estate, and even learned to anticipate Dominic's needs: coffee precisely at 7:30, 3 documents placed at the top of his desk by noon, evening summaries prepared before dinner. She wasn't simply completing tasks, she was becoming essential. In return, Dominic began to understand her in ways she didn't expect anyone to see. He noticed how she flinched at sudden footsteps behind her, how she instinctively apologized even when she hadn't done anything wrong, how she tensed when men raised their voices in the next room. He didn't comment on these details, but his behavior shifted subtly whenever he sensed her discomfort: lowered tones, slower movements, gentler phrasing. For a man who had built an empire on intimidation, he was surprisingly careful with her. One evening, after a particularly long meeting with international partners, Dominic returned to his office looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. Emily hesitated before speaking. "You should take a break," she suggested softly. "You've been in meetings since morning." Dominic loosened his tie, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "I don't have the luxury of breaks." She stepped closer, offering the summary she had prepared. "Then at least rest for a moment," she said. "You look tired." The word felt strange to say to a man like him, but truthful. Dominic's gaze drifted to her, and something shifted in his expression, a softness, a flicker of curiosity, almost tenderness. "I'm not used to people caring whether I rest," he said. Emily blinked. "I care." The room went still for a beat. Dominic didn't respond immediately, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Thank you," he said quietly. He took the summary from her hand, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. The contact was brief, accidental, but enough to send a small jolt through her chest. She stepped back quickly, cheeks warming, and Dominic's eyes followed her with a look that bordered on something she didn't know how to name. Their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. Marco caught Dominic watching Emily one afternoon with an expression he hadn't seen on his boss in years. Arianna grew even more attached to Emily, dragging her into late-night movie sessions, insisting she join family dinners, calling her my favorite person besides Dad. The household staff adored her. Even the estate guards treated her with a respect usually reserved only for those inside Dominic's inner circle. But what changed most was Emily herself. She began to walk with steadier steps, her shoulders less hunched. She spoke with more confidence. She laughed more freely, something Dominic found himself listening for without realizing why. She became a part of their world, not through force or manipulation, but through quiet resilience, honesty, and a depth of kindness none of them had expected. And Dominic, who spent years building walls around himself taller than any skyscraper in Manhattan, found those walls cracking in ways he couldn't control. He caught himself looking for her when she wasn't in the room. He measured time not by business meetings but by the soft cadence of her voice. When she smiled, something inside him, something long buried, shifted. He didn't act on any of it. He didn't speak of it. But it was there. Their worlds were merging slowly, quietly, dangerously. What neither of them knew was that outside the Russo estate, other eyes were watching. Eyes that had noticed Dominic's new weakness. Eyes that understood what Emily had unknowingly become. And those eyes belonged to the Volkov syndicate. Mark Carter had a nose for weakness, especially when it belonged to someone he believed he still owned. For years he had survived by preying on the vulnerable, Emily's mother when she was sick, Emily when she was young, and countless others who crossed his path. After Emily escaped and took Grace with her, Mark spiraled deeper into debt, drinking away his money, temper, and what remained of his dignity. So when a suspiciously large deposit from an unknown account hit his bank, that weak money clearly intended as bait, he didn't question it. He simply followed the trail, convinced Emily had finally come into something valuable, convinced she owed him, convinced she couldn't outrun him forever. The man didn't know who Dominic Russo was, didn't know whose estate he was approaching, didn't know he was walking into the center of a storm far more dangerous than anything he had ever inflicted on a helpless teenager. All he saw was a massive iron gate, towering stone pillars, and a long driveway lit with warm exterior lighting. "Look at that," he muttered, breath heavy with bourbon. "She thinks she's better than me now." The guard stationed at the front gate stepped forward. "Name?" Mark scoffed. "Emily Carter's father. Tell her to get out here." The guard's expression did not shift. "State your business." Mark slammed a hand against the metal bars. "I said tell my daughter to get her ass outside. She knows what she owes me." The guard signaled subtly to the security booth, and the gates parted, not because Mark was a welcomed guest, but because Dominic wanted answers. Two men escorted him up the driveway, their steps steady but ready for violence if necessary. Mark mistook their restraint for fear. "Damn right," he slurred. "Walk me in. She's going to pay back every penny." When they entered the front hall, Mark stumbled to a stop. The mansion was overwhelming, high ceilings, chandeliers, marble floors that gleamed beneath soft lighting. For a brief moment he looked almost intimidated. Almost. But then arrogance resurfaced, as it always did. "She must be living real nice," he sneered. Didn't realize she was screwing rich men now. The sound of approaching footsteps silenced him mid-sentence. Dominic Russo appeared at the top of the staircase, descending with the poised, calculated movements of a man accustomed to commanding attention. His dark eyes landed on Mark with an unreadable expression. Mark observed Dominic for a moment, his drunken brain slow to understand he was in the presence of someone he should fear. "You the rich guy?" he asked. "The one she's working for?" Dominic reached the bottom step and stopped, hands in his pockets, posture composed. "I am, and you are the man who abused her." The blunt accusation knocked a flicker of surprise into Mark's face before his indignation returned tenfold. Abused, please. The girl was ungrateful, lazy, just like her mother. Dominic stepped closer, his voice low but razor-sharp. Choose your next words carefully. Mark laughed as if the threat were amusing. She owes me money, you know that? Doctor's bills, food, shelter. I fed her for years. She should be on her knees thanking me. Dominic studied him as if examining a disease under a microscope. This man truly believed his own delusions. Emily owes you nothing, Dominic said. But you owe her for every bruise, every scar, every night she hid from you. Before Mark could retort, a small gasp echoed from the hallway. Emily had left the office early to bring Dominic a report and found herself frozen mid-step when she saw him. Mark, the monster of her childhood, standing in the Russo foyer as if he had every right to be there. Her breath caught, her pulse spiked, her hands started to shake uncontrollably. Memories crashed into her, his yelling, the blows, the nights she curled against a wall, Grace crying in the next room. Mark turned toward her, eyes narrowing. There she is, he said with a twisted smile. My girl, you finally decided to come home. Emily's body reacted before her mind could. She stumbled backward, shoulder hitting the wall as her chest tightened painfully. Dominic took one look at her and understood everything he needed to understand. His voice hardened, deepened. Do not take another step toward her. Mark rolled his eyes. She's my daughter. I will talk to her how I want. She is not your anything, Dominic replied, stepping fully between them. And you will not speak to her again. Mark's temper snapped. You think you can keep her from me? I will take her home myself. She belongs to. Dominic didn't let him finish. His hand shot out, gripping Mark by the throat, slamming him against the wall so hard the impact shook dust from the molding. Mark wheezed, hands clawing at Dominic's wrist, feet kicking helplessly. Dominic leaned close, voice like steel sharpened to a deadly edge. You lost the right to call her your daughter the moment you laid a hand on her. Emily swallowed hard, trembling uncontrollably, torn between fear and disbelief. No one had ever stood between her and her stepfather. No one had ever defended her with this level of force. Dominic tightened his grip just enough to make Mark understand who held power here. You sold her to traffickers, he said coldly. You abandoned Grace. You beat them both for years. If you think for 1 second I will let you breathe the same air as her again, you're mistaken. Mark sputtered, face turning red, his voice strangled. She's mine, you can't. Dominic released him suddenly, letting him collapse to the floor. Before Mark could scramble away, 2 guards seized him and forced him onto his knees. Dominic didn't shout, he didn't lose control, his calm made him even more terrifying. If you ever approach Emily or Grace again, he said, you will disappear from this city without a trace. Mark spat blood onto the marble floor. You think you're a hero, you're just a thug with money. Dominic crouched slightly, gripping Mark's chin so tightly the man winced. I'm the man who decides whether you leave this house alive. Emily flinched as the tension escalated, but Dominic didn't look away from Mark. You will pack your things, leave New York within the hour. You will not contact Emily. You will not contact Grace. You will not return. Mark trembled, something finally cracking inside his bravado. Fear, the real kind, settled across his face. Dominic leaned closer. If you do, I will personally ensure your last moments are far worse than anything you ever did to her. The guards dragged Mark away, his curses echoing weakly behind him as he realized his power over Emily had ended forever. When the front doors finally slammed shut, Emily stood rooted in place, breathing unevenly, tears gathering in her eyes. Dominic turned toward her slowly, the fury draining from his expression, replaced with something softer. He can't hurt you anymore, he said, voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Not ever again. Emily covered her face with trembling hands and a quiet sob broke free, raw, painful, years overdue. Dominic stepped closer, hesitated only a second, then placed a steady hand on her shoulder. He didn't pull her into an embrace, but the warmth of his touch soothed something deep inside her chest. For the first time since childhood, Emily didn't feel alone. The Volkov Syndicate had existed in New York long before Dominic Russo took control of Manhattan's underworld, but under the leadership of Victor Volkov, they had grown more ambitious, more organized, and infinitely more brutal. Victor was not a man who acted impulsively. He was a strategist, someone who preferred patience over force until an opportunity presented itself. And in the weeks following Emily Carter's arrival at the Russo estate, Victor finally saw what he had been waiting for, a crack in Dominic's legendary armor. It began with small observations, subtle patterns collected by men who knew how to blend into crowds, how to disappear into winter shadows, how to watch without being seen. Dominic Russo had always been careful, guarded, and emotionally impenetrable. He valued money, influence, and power, but never people, or so they thought. Yet recently something had changed. Dominic's routines altered. His security increased around not just his daughter but the unfamiliar young woman who moved quietly beside him. She traveled in his cars. She entered restricted areas of the estate. She appeared in meetings not speaking, simply taking notes, yet treated with a level of deference none of his staff had ever received. Through a long-range lens from an abandoned loft across from a midtown office building, one of Victor's scouts snapped photos of Dominic stepping aside so Emily could pass first through a doorway, his hand hovering protectively near the small of her back. Protectiveness was not a trait Victor had ever associated with Dominic. The scout emailed the photo immediately. Victor stared at the image for several beats, his lips curving slightly, so he murmured, "The king finally has something to lose." He began gathering information. His operatives hacked databases, bribed hospital workers, stole scraps of records, and followed leads across Queens, Brooklyn, and Manhattan. In less than a week, Victor knew everything Dominic had uncovered about Emily: her tragic childhood, her escape from trafficking, her devotion to her sister, her poverty, her unexpected bravery the night she saved Arianna. Victor found it almost poetic. A girl who crawls out of the gutter and into the arms of New York's most powerful man. He mused to his second-in-command, Sergei. "There's nothing more dangerous than someone who becomes a man's heart." Sergei nodded. "Do we take her?" "Not yet," Victor replied. "We study, we find her patterns. Dominic is predictable in his ruthlessness but not in his attachments. This is new ground." So they watched. They watched as Emily moved through the Russo estate with careful confidence, always accompanied by security but unaware that a second set of eyes followed her every day. They watched as she walked with Arianna in the garden, the teenager leaning into her with affection. They watched as Dominic met with Emily in his office late at night, their conversations private but their expressions telling Dominic's guarded tension, Emily's quiet sincerity, the strange warmth that passed between them in rare unguarded moments. They recorded all frame by frame. One cold evening, while Dominic and Emily left the Russo Tower after a long meeting, a Volkov operative sat quietly in a parked car nearby. Engine off, window cracked just enough to prevent fogging. He watched through binoculars as Dominic opened the rear door of the car for Emily, a gesture startlingly gentle for a man known for brutality. The operative lowered the binoculars and whispered into his earpiece, "It's true. She matters to him." Seconds later came Victor's reply, smooth and satisfied, "Good, we can use her." Inside the car, Dominic didn't know he was being watched. Emily sat beside him, flipping through the pages of a report, unaware of his gaze lingering on her every few moments. She wore one of the new coats Arianna had insisted she needed, a dark, warm wool that complemented her eyes. Dominic noticed details like that now, though he refused to examine why. "You should rest," he said softly. "It's been a long day." Emily shook her head lightly. "I don't mind. I like helping." The sincerity in her tone stirred something deep in him, something dangerous. "You shouldn't have to work yourself so hard," he murmured. "I'm used to it," she admitted. Dominic's jaw tightened. He hated that sentence more than she would ever know. Victor reviewed the footage later that night, leaning back in his leather chair as he replayed Dominic's expression in slow motion, soft concern, protectiveness. A man who had killed without hesitation now looked at this girl as if she were the last precious thing left in his world. Victor paused the video. "This is how we break him," he whispered. The plan formed quickly, shaped by precision rather than chaos. They would not attack Dominic directly. They would not touch Arianna, who was too well guarded and too politically risky. But Emily was attainable, a ghost in the system. No social media, no police record recent enough to raise alarms, no family except a young sister. And she trusted too easily forgiving faces, gentle voices, people who seemed harmless. Victor would exploit that trust. He had done it many times before. 2 days later, a Volkov operative disguised as a delivery driver approached the hospital where Grace Carter had her weekly checkups. The man never entered, he simply observed, mapping schedules, identifying vulnerabilities, noting which nurses interacted with Grace, which hallways lacked cameras, which entrances were used by visiting family. Grace herself remained untouched for now, but the implication was clear: they were learning the shape of Emily's world from every angle. Meanwhile, Marco noticed small irregularities, a car idling too long near the estate gate. An unfamiliar man seen twice at a cafe Emily visited with Arianna, a shadow in a roofing access corridor that disappeared before guards reached it. He reported it all to Dominic. Dominic didn't hesitate. Security doubled overnight, routes changed. Additional personnel were assigned to Emily discreetly. She noticed the shift, puzzled but grateful. Dominic simply told her, "You are under my protection. That means precautions." But Victor adapted just as quickly. The more Dominic tried to shield her, the more obvious her importance became. And the more obvious her importance became, the bolder Victor grew. One night, after Emily finished organizing files in Dominic's office, she stepped outside to find the hallway unusually quiet. The guards who normally stood beside the elevator were gone, reassigned temporarily to deal with a false alarm at the loading dock. She pressed the elevator button, her breath fogging slightly in the cold draft from the vents. When the doors opened, she stepped forward without noticing the faint reflection of someone standing in the far corner of the adjacent stairwell. A camera flickered on from above, transmitting the moment back to Victor's tablet. He smiled. Soon, he murmured, very soon, she will belong to me. Because in the world of men like Victor Volkov, the surest way to bring down a king was simple. You steal his heart. And Emily Carter had unknowingly become Dominic Russo's. The story of Emily Carter and Dominic Russo offers a powerful lesson about the unexpected forms courage can take, especially in a world that often rewards cruelty and overlooks quiet strength. Emily's journey teaches us that bravery doesn't always roar. Sometimes it is a woman without a coat stepping into a blizzard because she refuses to leave another human being to die alone. Sometimes it is a survivor who gets up every morning despite hunger, fear, and exhaustion, choosing kindness even when the world has shown her almost none. Her life reminds us that true strength rarely comes from power or wealth, it comes from heart, from resilience, from the stubborn belief that goodness still matters even when the world tries to crush it out of you. Emily had nothing, yet she gave everything she had. That kind of courage leaves an imprint on others, even those hardened by violence. Dominic's journey offers a different lesson, a reminder that no one is beyond change. He spent years building walls out of necessity, armor forged from brutality and control. But the moment Emily saved his daughter, a crack formed in that armor. Through Emily, he remembered that the protecting someone out of love is far different from protecting them out of obligation or fear. It is vulnerability wearing the face of strength. Dominic had lived so long in a world where loyalty was transactional and affection dangerous that he forgot what it meant to care without strategy. Emily challenged him not with force, but with humanity, something more disarming than any weapon. The lesson in their connection is that even the coldest hearts can, though, when confronted with real compassion. Change doesn't always come from dramatic gestures. Sometimes it begins with a single act of selflessness witnessed at the right moment. Another message woven throughout the story is that trauma does not define a person's value. Emily had been discarded, abused, forgotten by systems meant to protect her, yet none of that diminished her worth. Society often measures people by their success, their appearance, or what they can offer. Emily's life serves as a reminder that the quietest individuals often carry the deepest stories built on endurance, sacrifice, and unwavering love for others. Her survival was not the result of luck, it was the result of relentless determination. And when she finally received help, it wasn't because she begged for it, it was because someone recognized the extraordinary resilience she had cultivated in silence. Her journey teaches us that even when life strips everything from you, dignity and compassion are choices you can still hold on to. The story also explores the idea that family is not defined by blood. Dominic, Arianna, Grace, and Emily all come from different worlds, yet their lives intertwine in ways that reshape each of them. Dominic becomes the protector Emily never had, while Emily becomes the grounding force he never knew he needed. Arianna gains a sister figure whose kindness softens the edges left by growing up in a dangerous empire. Grace receives a future she never would have had otherwise. Blood may connect people biologically, but loyalty, care, and shared struggle forge bonds far stronger than lineage. The lesson here is that family can be chosen, forged through trust and love rather than. Furthermore, the story shows how redemption often comes through responsibility. Dominic cannot undo the violence of his past, nor the empire he built through fear, but he can choose who he becomes next. Protecting Emily, healing the wounds of her past, and giving Grace a future aren't acts of charity, they are acts of atonement. And Emily, in accepting help, chooses to believe that she deserves better than suffering. Redemption is not always loud or dramatic. Often it's a series of small, deliberate decisions made day after day, choosing to be better than the person you were before, choosing to rise rather than sink. Lastly, the looming threat of the Volkov syndicate reminds us that the things we love most are often the things that make us vulnerable. Love creates risk, the risk of loss, pain, betrayal, but love is also what makes life meaningful. Dominic spent years avoiding attachments because attachments could be used against him. But once he allowed Emily into his life, he understood that vulnerability is not weakness, it is the price of connection. His willingness to risk everything for her underscores one final lesson of the story, that the most dangerous thing a person can do is care deep, but the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to let fear stop them from caring. Together, these lessons intertwine into a portrait of humanity, its scars, its strength, its capacity to change, and its undeniable need for connection. Emily's compassion, Dominic's transformation, Arianna's gratitude, and Grace's fragile hope all reveal a truth that threads through every chapter, no matter how dark the world becomes. One act of courage can spark a chain reaction of healing. And sometimes the people who seem the smallest, the most broken, the most overlooked are the ones who carry the greatest ability to change the lives around them. The story teaches us that love is both shield and target, that kindness can topple empires of indifference, and that even in a city built on power games and silent wars, the human heart remains the most unpredictable force of all.
If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.